Hello, everyone. We'll take just a moment and let everyone get signed in, and then we'll get started with today's presentation. So I think we'll go ahead and get started with our presentation today. My name is Georgi, and I'm here to have the opportunity to talk to you about something that is really super near and dear to my heart, and that's community cafes. And as you see, as the slide advances, that I am considered kind of one of the parent leaders to talk about community cafes. It is something I have been involved with since my kids were actually very little. And so probably about since 2014 or 15, when the community cafes first came to New York State through a grant opportunity. And I took the time to not only have an opportunity to do cafes in my own community, but also an opportunity to learn how can I be a trainer and spread this and share it with other community leaders and other parent leaders. And also from doing this, I was able to work with our state Children's Trust Fund and was able to, from there, advance to working with the Children's Trust Fund Alliance. And I sit on their parent council as the Alliance National Parent Partnership member, and I'm co-chairing that work right now. And so I want to get to know a little bit about you before we get going too much. So let's use the chat box. I'd love for you to type in your name, county, and how do you know you're where you're meant to be? And don't put because it's on your schedule, because everybody knows schedules are crazy right now. And so how do you know you're supposed to be here, taking up 2 hours of your time, spending it here with me? I'd love to hear some of those thoughts that you have. So I'm going to stop my share so that way I can check out the chat. So if you could type in your name, your county, and how do you know you're where you're supposed to be? Hi, Kathy, welcome, glad to see you here. And then we have Kathy, Yvette. Hey, Yvette, it's nice to have you with us. Robert Smith, welcome. Jody, glad to see you here. For me, this question is really exciting because as I've been working with the Cafe Project over the years and kind of thinking it through of how do we really make this kind of take hold in communities, like not just be an idea that comes in for a short time and then fades away. I'm like, we got to do something more. And I have really kind of taken it upon myself to really watch the counties and the places where people are coming from, where they're hearing about this, and this can possibly get embedded into their communities. And Lori, I appreciate you say you're where your intentions bring you. Very good. It's important to kind of think through, this isn't your typical thing of, let me add this to your workload. This is almost a way of thinking, a way of approaching the work, a way of thinking through how do we do differently in our communities. And I think with COVID, especially right now, that's really important. It's an overwhelming time for families. It's an overwhelming time for us as a community of just how do we even respond and meet the needs of families. And I think too, it's how do we stay connected when we have to social distance? There's so many questions, a lot of unrest as well in terms of culture and just how people are approaching all of the issues that are being raised during this time. And what I think is really powerful and what I believe in my whole heart is cafes are a place and an approach that you can use to have some of those hard conversations, to bring people together and talk about, well, how do we do differently in our community? How do we help each other? And right now, I especially think of that because I think of how, for me, this all started. And for me, I was teaching in the schools, decided to stop teaching so that my husband and I could start our family. And that start is kind of like how this road looks. We had a destination in mind. We were going to raise our children for a while till they got to school age. Then I would go back to teaching. And it was after having my first child where I was involved with early intervention that I realized that my road wasn't going to be this perfect straight path ahead to the destination. I was going to see some mountains. I was going to have some barriers to some trees along that path. I was going to have to learn how to not only look at my own self as a parent, but look at how do I reach out to my community? How do I ask for help and support? How do I get new skills? And I was very blessed and fortunate to have amazing support in my community at a time where, to be honest, it was hard to be able to rely on family and friends. It was uncertain, it was murky. And when I heard about the community cafes from my early intervention team, they're like, I think you might like this, Kara. It's an opportunity to talk with the community. And I said, okay, well, what's the big deal about cafes? Like, how's the cafe going to help me? And when I got started and started having these conversations in the community, it gave me an opportunity to meet other parents. Hearing some of their similar challenges, some of their thoughts, it just gave you that sense of kind of warmth of other people that are feeling the same things you are, almost validating it, because some of those feelings are hard to accept, especially right now with COVID. But back then it was just kind of accepting the ups and downs that come with parenting young children. And for us, very often our biggest thing that we'd say is there wasn't really a good spot for us to take our young kids to kind of build their relationship. There's McDonald's Playland, there's library story time, but not really a place. And as a result of that, we now have a play space here in the county that I live in, which is in Cayuga County in Auburn. And we have the ABC Cayuga Play Space. And it is a place for children birth to age 7. And they get to play and grow and build relationships. And that came as a result of the start, which was us doing community cafes. It was us looking first and foremost at the kids in our community and saying, what can we do differently for them? What can we do differently for their parents? How do we create the environment for joy, laughter, great development happening for these children, for families, for our community? And it was having these conversations. It was parents raising it. And as a result of that, we were able to bring the play space into existence, which we're super excited about. For me, it's one of those places that both of my children are now just to the point of not being able to go to the play space and have fun, but they're still welcome there. And the staff still greet us with a warm smile and love on my kids just as if they were family. And again, that was because of cafe conversation. So as I share about the cafe with you today, I want you to remember the smiles on these kids' faces. I want you to remember the sense of joy, the sense of warmth. And I know right now it's hard to get that to happen because we are living in times of social distancing and I'm having to connect with you virtually right now instead of in person. But I'm hoping today you get a small sense of that warmth and that joy. And so to start, we have to talk about where it all began, and that is with the World Cafe. And so the World Cafe got developed and they have some guidelines about having fun. That's one of my favorite parts, as well as the playing and drawing and doodling. It's a great opportunity to kind of let loose, kind of take your hat off, put kind of some of the worries to the side. It's an opportunity where you can listen and really kind of look for patterns, linking things. And I think the biggest thing for me was the listening piece. If it wasn't the listening to respond, it was listening to understand. So I want you to think about that for a second. How often in today's world do we truly have the ability to just listen? Hear what the person's saying, not feel that we have to have a response, a solution, a resource. How often do we kind of take that pause? The cafes provide that. It's an opportunity where, yes, there's a facilitator, but that's not always necessarily the leader. Sometimes it might not be a service provider. It might actually be a parent. That's what happened in our community. It started with co-leadership, actually, of a service provider as well as parents. And so I want you to think through that and think through, how do you contribute your thinking? How do you speak with your mind and your heart and have that time to slow down? Because now more than ever, we need that, especially with Zoom meetings. Think about it. People are like scheduling them back to back. And is there even enough pause to get out of one and get on the next one in time anymore? It's really not there anymore. So how do we create that space? And like I said, the World Cafe kind of created that. And it actually started in 1995 in California, was a group kind of talking and having a casual conversation that this kind of got developed. The World Cafe is based on 3 rounds of conversation around a question, and you kind of move from table to table in between. In today's virtual land, that would be you move from breakout room to breakout room. So think of it, you want to hear from more than just the people you're comfortable with. When you typically walk into a room, even now in COVID times, you're going to kind of gravitate to the people that you know, the people you're comfortable with. Cafes encourage you to start there, but then get to know some other people, develop some other relationships, and very often find some very unexpected but awesome opportunities to build relationships. What's important if you are hosting the cafes is the links that are made in between. So hearing the ideas and starting to make connections between them. Listening is, are the conversations showing that there's not a space for children? Is it showing that families are stressed and they don't know what to do? They don't have good coping mechanisms right now. They feel like they're at the max. Is it they're asking for services because they don't know if they pick up the phone, is there really going to be support on the other end? What are we hearing? Are we also hearing about family strengths? Are we hearing how families are getting on social media, building up their own groups, and being there to support one another? It's not just about the what's wrong in our communities, it's also about what's strong. And so as we're listening to the conversations, and I know very often we're in that space of, well, if there's a problem, then we are going to fix it this way, and we're going to always be looking for how do we make it better? What about stopping instead of just saying, how do we make it better? What if instead we're saying, what's strong, and how are we going to build on that? How often do we take the time to really see the staff that are working overtime to meet families in unique ways? People that are extending kindness in different ways. How often are we recognizing that, yes, COVID came, but guess what? Families are finding creative ways to meet their needs. And some family resource centers, I know, have been actually coming up with creative ways to still get resources in the hands of families. That's powerful. We need to hear that, though, in these cafes. We need that because we need to be able to build on that. And as the conversations happen, what I appreciate is while there is the opportunity to take some notes, it's not super formal, very relaxed. People can be, like I said, doodling on the table, drawing. And to be honest, some of those visuals that happen in the cafes are some of the most powerful visuals that you can see because people will be making connections through pictures. And so think of how you can then use that in programming and how you can put it out on flyers, how you can use those images to kind of draw people together because you're elevating them. You're recognizing who they are. And that's what the cafes do. They do have principles for how you host the conversations. And so the first part is setting the context, setting up the space. It's figuring out what are we even going to be talking about? Is it we're going to talk about COVID? Are we going to talk about services? Are we going to talk about supports? Are we going to talk about education? Really setting up what is it you're going to have that focus on? Because that's important because at the end of this, when we do get to the part where we talk about the data collection and all of that, it's important that when you're figuring that piece out, that you have some clear goal in mind or direction that you'd like to go of thinking of what is the hope for us by hosting these cafes. It's really important that you create a hospitable space. I'm going to share with you one of the cafes that I was hosting is kind of awkward because we had our typical meal at the beginning to kind of just give everybody time to settle in and get comfortable. And there was an individual who walked into the cafe and they kind of went off to the side. We greeted them and kind of gave them the same warm welcome that we do to everyone. But during the cafe conversation, they opted, instead of kind of joining us and moving tables and kind of standing up and moving around the room, they opted to just sit to the side. And while some people originally, when we debriefed this, were like, oh my goodness, like this person truly missed out, I said, what if the person didn't miss out? What if what the person was looking for that night was just being in a space and hearing from other people? What if that person has a lot on their plate right now and the thought of talking, even starting to talk and share, was going to be too much? So instead of them talking and sharing, they listened and absorbed from the group. You need to have a space where it's safe to do that, where someone can say, I'd like to pass for now. And that reason doesn't have to be disclosed. It's simply a safe space. We also have to really think through the questions that we're asking in this space. Are they questions that could potentially trigger someone to have strong emotions or a strong reaction? Are we using language that is even approachable? I like to sometimes say, are we using technical language, the program language? Are we getting things that are clear so anyone could answer those questions? Also, it's about encouraging everyone to contribute. We all know there's some of those people when we're in groups, they like to be the talker. If you ask Melanie and Tim, they'll tell you Kara likes to talk. She likes to be able to share. And if she has ideas, she won't share one, she'll share like 20. So just know that about me. But in that way, yes, that's important for me to be able to do that. But I also have to create the space for others to be able to share and contribute their thoughts, their thinking, and really give them the space. And by doing that, it's simply saying, hey, do you have a thought that you'd like to share? What are you thinking? It's also really looking at connecting diverse perspectives. As I shared, it's an opportunity to kind of like take your hat off. A couple examples of that would be when at my school we do community cafes, and at the time there were a lot of school shootings. It's tense, it's hard. Some of our families were really concerned. We brought in our police department, our building leadership, our school board members, and in the cafe we gave a space where they could wear those hats and speak from them. But then we shifted into a cafe, and it was no longer the police chief sitting there. It was a guy who loves and cares about the children in our community. It was no longer the superintendent, but a guy who really loves the kids. And it was being able for them to take those hats off and those responsibilities and just talk about how do we share safety things with families? How do we create a safe space? Additionally, right now with COVID, as we all know, schools across New York State are doing school very differently. Our district is doing its own thing, and what I appreciate about the cafes is it gave us a space to highlight that and say, yeah, we might be doing things differently than the other schools around us, but maybe different's okay. Maybe different will be good, because what if it's an opportunity for us to really strategically look at how do we bring children back to school? And we were able to have a really powerful conversation with families across our district. And being able to have those families not feel frustrated and tense, but be able to really share authentically. They're scared, they're nervous, they're overwhelmed when they're trying to work and do school at the same time. And schools being able to talk through, what is it that we really hope for this year? And part of that too is listening for insights, but also sharing collective discoveries. What are you finding from hosting these conversations? And so these are kind of like the framework that sets up a cafe. It kind of helps build it all together. And notice that it's circular. We want to really kind of wrap our arms around our community and say, what is it that we can do if we host these conversations? It also is about conversational leadership. And so why I put this slide in is it was Tom Hurley and Juanita Brown who really kind of put this idea of the World Cafe together. They based it on the idea of conversational leadership, meaning if we start from the left-hand side, we want purpose and strategic intent. We don't want to just go listing community cafes and saying we did them for the sake of doing them. No, we want to strategically use them. We want to think through what's our purpose of bringing people together to talk. We all know that there's those meetings that we go in and we all talk and it sounds great and it's warm and it's fuzzy, and then we all leave and go our separate ways and nothing happens. That is not the intent for cafes. It's about what's in the center, talking about critical issues and questions. It's about all the key stakeholders coming together, and that includes parents. It's about collaborative social technologies. It's figuring out how do we bring them together. And at the center is the conversation. It's about giving all of those people space to talk, to share. And at the end, it's shooting out on the arrow. The collective intelligence and the wise action that we bring together from having those conversations. Meaning, don't leave your conversation without some action steps, some thoughts of what are you going to do. And I shared the article that is tied to this at the bottom of the screen. So that's something you can go and reference and kind of learn more by reading about that. But I really encourage you to think through, This isn't an add-on. If you're going to use this, use it strategically. Don't bring people together just to have conversations and say, wow, that was nice, we heard input from our community, and then leave it at that. No, what do you want to do with that you learned? What are your families saying? What is your community needing right now? And as I think about New York State, like I shared, I'd love cafes to happen across the entire state. But what I appreciate and I know about New York State is it's very different all across the state with what we're all facing, how things look, how we're managing things, from communities that are very urban to those that are very rural. We need to think through, how do we help bring people together for conversations? And as I shared, thinking through COVID with it being electronic, what truly is the electronic capability of parents and people coming together and being able to talk? Is there technology? Is there access? And if there isn't, then how do we strategically look at our key stakeholders and find a way to make it happen? It's really, truly powerful when it can happen. So that is the World Café model. So that is where this all originated from or started. Now we're going to shift into what is different between the World Café model and the Community Café. There's a lot of overlap, so those strategical pieces are all in place. But with the Community Café, something that gets woven in is the protective factors. And as I shared, I work with the Children's Trust Fund Alliance on their Alliance National Parent Partnership Council. And this is an infographic that we created based on the protective factors. So the protective factors are 5 things that research has shown that families need to be strong. And what we as a parent council are trying to do is make protective factors approachable for families. We want protective factors to be in the everyday actions. And there are specific everyday actions in research that can back up and show families, wow, look at what you're doing to build your social connections. Look what you're doing to build your resilience right now. And so that is a piece that is very important with the protective factors. And when I was preparing this presentation, I was debating because I almost, instead of this slide, which inspires me and gets me excited because there's a lot to take in from the components of what the birds are saying to what's in the tree, it got me thinking of, for me, my start with cafes was there was a sheet that we put out on the table every time we did a cafe, and it had the protective factors on it. Had stones and it had them listed and it talked about what they were. And I'd put it out, but I'll be honest with you, I didn't really connect to it. It was like, okay, we put this out, that's what we do, and it's protective factors, and yeah, that's important, yay. And I tried to connect to it, like when it was my time as a parent to teach it, I was like, okay, let me read the sheet, but I didn't really know what it meant for me as a parent. Like there wasn't a bridge made for me until I went and took some time to intentionally learn about the protective factors. I've done the free online course that the Alliance offers about the protective factors that gave me some concrete ideas of what does that mean in my parenting, because there were activities that caused me to think about, well, what is resilience really? And then I was able to go through the in-person training, and I can honestly tell you the in-person training changed my life. I can say it started with the protective factors and me kind of getting to know them a little in the cafes, like that was almost like the starting of the scratching of the surface. But where I took off was that training, because I learned things like resilience. I didn't feel I was a very resilient parent at the time. I felt I was like just doing the best I could, and I would say I'm surviving, I'm doing good. I learned resilience, though, isn't about surviving and doing good. Resilience is about going through the really hard and the tough and coming out strengthened and transformed on the other side. And when I was able to go through activities that taught me that, it taught me how I could be a stronger parent. It taught me how I could use that in my everyday moments when I was celebrating milestones, or also when I was in my most challenging moments. Protective factors have truly become something that I rely on my everyday, because when I'm struggling most, it's what I go to. And what I appreciate is the community cafes are grounded in that, meaning we find intentional ways to bring in the protective factors into the cafe. We think through, are we talking about knowledge of child development? With that, I think of right now, there's a lot of families who have kids with behaviors. And we've been having conversations of how some kids have regressed in behavior, and then even how, especially for the preteen and teen children, they're going through some different changes themselves. And how do you know what is appropriate developmentally? How do you know, is your kid truly just driving you crazy, or is your child actually developing some skills that you need to help foster? community cafes can help parents tease that out. Because community cafes and that approach is all about meaningful conversations that are really going to spark leadership to build the relationships necessary to strengthen families. Additionally, what's important about this approach is it's really grounded in the appreciative inquiry process, meaning we're going to dream together, we're going to design something strategically, we're going to discover things, hopefully, about not only ourselves, but others in the community, and then we're going to come up with a way to deliver. It's all grounded with the World Cafe principles that I shared previously. So think of it as we started with this big whole, and then we spun it off a little bit, and we put an add-on of protective factors and the appreciative inquiry process. Let's talk through that a little bit. So the appreciative inquiry 4D model, kind of think through. You have the opportunity to dream. You want to dream what could be, envisioning the possible, really thinking of what are you going to do to innovate? What could happen if there was the opportunity? Think through that, especially right now. It's hard to dream because we think of all the barriers and the things going on. But what if we just say, okay, put COVID aside, put all the funding problems aside, what could really be? Think of all that could be there. Think of all that could be shared. Then the design, what should be? You have to build the idea. You have to think through what are the parts, what are the pieces that you need. And what I appreciate is it's about co-constructing, meaning it's not just professionals working on this, but professionals and families working side by side to dream of it. And what's interesting is when I started Cafés, how I said it started with my kids. My kids have been a big part of it. What is interesting is I didn't really recognize the importance of youth voice or including the child. And it's now, especially with my son being older, that I see the importance of that because I see how his voice played out in some of the things that happened in our community and happen currently with cafes that we're hosting. So I think through that, how do we hear from the youth? Especially right now. Think of the fact that right now we're in COVID school. So schools are doing everything in different ways right now. But what if it's an opportunity for community to come in and start asking children, what could we do in our community? What do you need right now? How could we make that possible? What if kids might have some of the answers in that design? Pretty amazing thought. Trust me, I've brainstorming and got lots of ideas there, but I want you to encourage you to think about that. It's not just families, and don't shortchange young children. Sometimes they have some really profound stuff they can say that can really change people's hearts and minds. Then it's about going out there and what will be deploying. It's executing with excellence. We want it to be sustainable. But most importantly, we have to discover what already is in our community. That discovery phase of what is working, what is strong. Do we have community clothes closets that are open right now for families to access clothes free of charge because their kids are growing like weeds and the regular stores are not open? Do we have resources for children and families right now as they're dealing with education? What do we have in terms of mental health supports? It's stressful. It's overwhelming right now. But if we can use community cafes as a spot to bring people together and know what is, discover what else could be, think of how that could change mental health for people in our communities. Think of the difference it could make. Then most importantly, if you're going to take that time to build those conversations, I really want you to think through some concrete things you can do in your communities to start building protective factors. As I shared, that training changed my life, and this is one of the pieces that was in it. It's something that was designed in Michigan in partnership with families to help them understand how to remember the protective factors and truly make it a part of their everyday lives. And so I want you, even though we're all virtual right now, hold your hand up, give your computer a thumbs up. Think about how it feels for that child to give them a thumbs up sign. Think of the power that your thumb has when you give them that good, you're doing a good job. It's the social and emotional competence of children. Children need to be able to understand their emotions, how to regulate them. Children right now need to know how to be social, and that's kind of a different type of thing for them right now. How are they social on electronic forms? I think through too, how do you connect with your family through virtual platforms? Or if you're in a situation where you actually can be in the same space as your family, how are you socially and emotionally handling that as a young child? Knowing you can't run up to grandma and give her a hug. You have to maintain the 6 feet distance. Knowing that warmth and some of those things that you would just routinely do, you can't do. How are we helping our children process that? Think through, too, how are we building that in our community? How are we helping kids talk about their big emotions, manage those emotions? So that's an important protective factor. And when I'm struggling on some of my parenting days, I ask myself that. Did social communication break down for my kids at that moment? Emotionally, were they having a really big emotion and we needed to work through that and name it? It's an important piece. Next one is that knowledge of parenting and child development. So I want you to hold up that pointer finger. Give yourself your number one. Think of how powerful that is if somebody hears you say, you're number one. When you think of the knowledge of parenting and child development, parents really are their children's first teacher. And I'll be honest, I thought I had a great parenting tool belt ready before I had my kids. I was like, I'm a teacher. I've had all this child development knowledge. I had my own experiences to rely on. And then I had my first child, my son. And I'm like, I have some tools and some great tools, but I need some more. And I needed to know that it was okay to ask others for ideas and input that they could share. So think through, how do we help parents know that they're number one? Because especially right now, and I know I keep going back to school, but it's really important for families right now, with school being a big part of their lives, of how do parents know that they're still number one? It's okay that you're not helping your child now work on walking or talking. You're helping your child with 4th grade math problems. You're helping your teenager with algebra or some big concept, and you're like, I did not sign up for this. I don't know this. But you can work through it with your child together. And think of the power and the impact. If we can help families realize, take a breath. It could be messy. It could fall apart. It could go wrong. But in the end, you're going to figure it out, and you're going to figure it out together. And think of that relationship of what's going to be able to happen. And I say that too, even for the working parents who are only able to help minimally. How are we helping them understand you're still number one in your kid's life? You're doing the best you can. You're providing for them, and you're helping them figure it out. May not be pretty, may be really stressful, but you're doing it. Parents need to know that. Next one, do not hold them up by himself, even though you're not on camera right now. So hold them together like that. Middle guy with his buddies. That's your social connections. So social connections are super important. And what's important about social connections is it's not just you have a lot of them. Like you got a lot of buddies near him. No, it's those positive social connections. Those people who lift you up, those people who encourage you, those people who help you on your hardest days, and the people who celebrate with you in the greatest, most profound ways on the other days. For this one, I think of a personal example of, I've been doing good for the most part, but one of my dear friends did this beautiful post on social media, just giving me a shout out this past weekend. And I have to tell you, I was like, oh my gosh, like, where's this coming from? And like, why is she doing this? But it felt so good. It was a social connection. She was recognizing, you're doing it. You've got this. So think of through, how do you have those social connections? And especially right now, how do you have them tight and strong, like my fingers tight together? Because right now we're socially distanced. How do we be that bridge? How do we help keep relationships thriving? And thinking through too, with families having to kind of be in their own space on top of each other, working, doing school, and just doing life, how do we help those social connections be strong? Because it can be exhausting being with the same people all the time. How do we help filter that? How do we help give each other space? Next one, as I shared, is super powerful. It's that ring finger. It's that commitment to yourself of resilience. It's thinking through, you're going to make a commitment right now to yourself that you may not know what's ahead, because none of us do with COVID. I wish somebody did. But we're going to make the commitment that we're going to go through it together, and we're going to go through the tough, the hard, the scary, the heartbreaking, the adventurous and the weird and the new normal, and we're going to come out strong and transformed on the other side as communities. Think of how if we could tell our communities that. If we truly could sit in a room and say, you know what, we have no idea. No one in the room has the perfect answer. And you're going to have tons of stakeholders sitting in that room. Giving the space to say, we have no idea, but we're going to figure it out together, and we're going to do this together, that's a powerful message. How do we get that out? It's in community conversations, where I'm no longer looking at people in leadership roles. Instead, I'm looking at us all as people in our community who want better, people in our community who want to know they're not alone, people in their community who have the pinky, the concrete support in times of need. Because there are times that we all feel small. There are times when we might feel like we can't do it. We need now more than ever to know that there are concrete supports out there. Part of the way of finding out what concrete supports actually work and which ones are out there is conversations, talking to people. There's going to be aha moments of, I didn't realize that there was a group where parents were talking and being there for each other, or I didn't realize that that resource existed in the community so that we could get food. I didn't realize that I could still ask for this resource even though there's COVID and have a provider still support me and my child. How do we get that happening? It's conversations. And so I want you thinking through, if you're going to use a cafe, some of the best ways for or uses are sharing knowledge, possibilities, real life issues and questions. What is kind of ironic when I think about this slide is I've been using this since I first learned about cafes. And like back then, like real life issues was just like basic daily stuff. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, real life issues right now, talking about race, talking about culture in our community, talking about education, talking about safety, talking about health. Those are real life issues. And guess what? We can find questions to talk about them in a cafe setting. Thinking through too, how can you engage people who may be meeting for the first time in real, authentic conversation? It's one of the reasons I had you all share when you first came on of where you're from. And so what I encourage you to do is figure out, how do you invite people who may have never met before? How do you help people that might be meeting for the very first time really talk? It's creating a space. It's inviting. It's asking them to be a part of it. And I think too right now, when I talk to you shortly about that part of engaging parents, that's overwhelming because some people are like, parents are too busy. Are you serious? Like they're not going to show up for anything extra. It's all in how you invite us. It's all in how you ask us. And again, a cafe is not just a one-way direction. It should be going both ways. There should be something being received from those that are hosting to those that are being a part of the conversation. What are they walking away with? It's about deepening relationships. It's not these surface level things anymore. It's really starting to get to know each other. Having the opportunity to ask that question, how are you today, and get a real answer. Because we all know we ask each other that. Very often in some of our work meetings, what we do is we'll be saying to one another, how's it going? Let's check in. Oh, I'm good. I'm taking it easy. How often do we really have the space to say, it's crazy right now. I have kids while I'm working. You're probably hearing a little bit of that. Hope it's not distracting. It's trying to figure out how do we keep up with our house, with our safety, with things that break down. I think of very often too, there's some families I know who their stove broke and literally they've had no stove for months because of COVID. And how are they figuring it out? They're grilling, they're using their microwave until their microwave then went. And again, it's a long wait for that. But if I don't have a good, deep relationship, I'm not going to hear that from most people. And I think too, in terms of relationships, it's how you show up on the other side. Do you really care? Do you check in? If you hear that there's something really troubling, do you authentically get in that space with them for the moment and then it's like it's gone? Or do you follow back up the next day and send a text or email or some way of connecting with them to really deepen the relationship? It's also about building collective wisdom. What's interesting when cafes happen, especially the ones that were happening in our local community, for one of them, we just spent time talking about What are all the great things in our community to do during the summer? And we made a list, and some of us were like asking each other, when did that place get created? Or where is that? And how did you know about that? It's having a conversation. It's talking. It's learning from one another. It's not having one person have to be the end-all, be-all who should know everything. No, it's about us all coming with our expertise, our knowledge, our wisdom. It's really taking it to a deeper level. And again, it's inviting each person to contribute. Because if we only ask one person to contribute, or we only let the few who really talk, we're missing an opportunity. We're missing an opportunity, A, to hear from them, but to be honest, some of the most profound or biggest revelations happen from those people who are quiet. And do you know why? It's because they're listening. Listening to truly listen. Not listening to respond, they're taking it in, they're making connections. And so how do we do this with COVID? You can hold virtual cafes using Zoom and breakout rooms. And so remember, it's 3 rounds of conversation. So what you would do is have everybody collectively come together like we are today. And then you would put them into small rooms. What I encourage you to do when you use breakout rooms, think through it strategically, meaning breakout rooms could be you initially do it as pairs and kind of pair everybody up randomly. The reason I say pairs is because if it's new to your community, it's an opportunity for you to teach that listening to listen as opposed to listening to respond. If you put them in a pair situation, you can put them in a breakout room, I'd say for about 10 minutes or so, 8 if you're kind of short on time. And you would let them know that this is a question you're going to ask, and you're going to give each one of them about 4 minutes to 5 minutes to share. You need to give those boundaries so they know how long they're each going to be talking, and then you send them off to their breakout room to then each have an opportunity. They'll introduce themselves, they'll answer the question, and hopefully really just listen to listen. Then you come back to the whole group, and you can kind of debrief. How was that? How did it feel? And then say, now I'm going to put you in breakout rooms of a few more people. Those rooms, I'm going to let you know, depending on how your timing plays out, you're going to probably want 6, 8 at the absolute max people in the room, especially if you only have 10 minutes. I'd say the best timing for those smaller breakout rooms is going to be probably about 15 minutes, just to truly allow people to share, and then that like exchange to happen where those connections happen. So I encourage you to really kind of think through strategically for that. For some people with Zoom, they don't have the opportunity for breakout rooms. So one of the things and strategies that you could use is, you know how there's all the squares? You can set it up as kind of all the holiday squares. For the square setup, PowerPoint is down, and then you can literally kind of play a game where you're calling it pass the ball. And you say, okay, I'm going to pass the ball to Melody. Melody gets to share, and then Melody chooses who she's going to pass the ball to, and let everyone go around and share. That's a way to do kind of a cafe conversation. It will take longer, especially if you have a big group. So again, think strategically in your timing, think strategically in your numbers. You could also host socially distanced cafes in larger spaces with limited participants. Again, obviously keeping safety first and foremost, but finding a way for people to communicate. Another strategy, if you're in a larger space and you're trying to think through logistically, how do we help people kind of capture things? If they're going to be standing, you could give them clipboards with notes that they could take. You could also give them a dry erase board, thinking through strategically being able to wipe it off and clean it easily, that they could use with dry erase markers if they want to capture thoughts or be doodling as they're talking. Then another opportunity would be using social media to get conversations going. Dropping little nuggets on social media platforms and seeing what people to respond to can help you to A, get a conversation going, but also know possibly where you could begin. The most important thing I want to share with all of you is some of us come with big, like I'm thinking New York State is going to have cafes across the entire state. It will happen. But I also have to remember my last bullet. I have to start small and build as I go, meaning we need to do trainings and opportunities like this where we start giving this information out and figuring out how do we help communities start this up? How do we build it as we go? Because at the end of the day, yes, I'm training and I'm in charge right now, but I honestly learn as much from those that I'm with when I'm hosting these conversations as me sharing that information with them. Another tool that I want to share with you, if you're trying to figure out how do I get this going and like I'm kind of overwhelmed here of like what's a good question. Remember how I said I'm with the Alliance National Parent Partnership Council? We as parents decided that protective factors are super important as a council. So we've created tools based on them, and one of them is this tool called Conversations for a Better Normal. It is grounded in the protective factor framework. It has questions that specifically tie to the everyday actions for each protective factor that kind of show how it plays out for families. And this tool has space where you can actually capture thoughts and notes. And as you note from the image that's on the far right, it is also available in Spanish. There's a facilitator's guide to help you. And what I encourage you to do is as you look at this guide, when we've been playing it out in the communities, we don't pick like parental resilience and ask all the parental resilience questions. We're finding when we're using this guide in the community, we pick about probably 1 to 2 questions max and hold a conversation about those. There is an opportunity for you to share back that information because we are using that data that we get back from people using this tool to actually help share with policymakers what it is families are saying they need during COVID. So I encourage you, check out this guide. It's a great jumping off point for you. If you're like, Kara, like you've kind of got me excited and revved up and I want to run, this is something you could use right now today. It's free to download. The website's there. If you have trouble downloading it or questions about it, you will have my contact information at the end to reach out. But this is a great thing that you could use right now that is specifically tied to COVID. So now my question is, what's your role? Again, think of how I said, how do you know you're meant to be here today? Well, it's more than just you wanted to take in the knowledge. What is going to be your piece that you're going to bring back to your community? What is going to be your role in making this happen, making this possible? If you were to have a cafe training, I want to give you an idea of what it would look like, and that is an image of my cute little Ellie, who was a part of the cafes with me at the beginning. As I shared, my kids have been a part of this. It's what I think is a part of why it's probably near and dear to my heart. But for actual training, it could look like this if you have parents with young children, that they might be holding their kids, or in between you might have kids come through. However, the morning what we do is we try to set the stage, kind of get you familiar, what we're going to talk about for the cafe. We give you some background. And then what we do is what we call the cafe experience. That means we actually host a cafe with you as participants. When we do that, we strategically kind of get to know the community first, or who the people will be first. So that way the questions tie in somehow for you. So that way it's not just we're giving you a good experience to make you feel good. No, we want to be able to use that. So we have the cafe experience, and then this is the piece that I haven't talked about yet. We do something called the harvest, meaning after we've rotated and done all these great conversations, then we share out. We share thoughts that stood out. We share things that we were surprised by. We share things we're proud of. We share things that we think of opportunities. We share connections. And that harvest really, truly becomes a tool for us to think through action steps. It's something that as Melody and I were doing trainings last year, we really took the harvest time to be an opportunity where we not only heard, but then we planned on, okay, now we heard all that, what are we going to do? And not only what are we going to do, but who's going to do it? Why do you think we asked that? Obviously, we want the follow through to happen. So it's thinking through strategically, how do we use this information that we're gathering? Then the afternoon portion, we kind of walk through the steps of hosting. How do you even start with creating questions? What are good questions? What are open-ended questions? And there's a guide that would help you to kind of work through that. We talk about the invitation. You want people to show up if you're investing time, right? But if your invitation falls flat, it's not going to go anywhere. And I think sometimes as we try to put these things out, we're like, okay, we'll make the flyer look pretty and like everyone will come. Not necessarily. People are going to say, what is a cafe? Why are you doing this? Do you really, like, what's your intention of why you're going to have me talk about how things are for me as a family? Is this good? Is this bad? You're going to have to do some framing of that in your community. What is this all about? Do we do text messages? Do we post on social media? For a little bit, for the ones that we were doing in our school, we took the opportunity to not only host them live and in person, but we also took the opportunity to actually broadcast them for families that might not be able to come. So thinking through opportunities like that, and with that, again, it's looking at your partners. Who in your community, who with the media could help? When we were hosting them in Auburn, we actually used the radio and we did short little spotlights talking about the cafe, talking about little nuggets of things that people might hear. It was an opportunity to just get the word out, start hearing from people. And then one of the reasons that people show up is because they were personally invited. Someone took the time not just to say, hey, this event's coming up, you should be there. Someone actually says, hey, this is coming up, want to come with me? Want to be there? It's that relationship piece. Then it's setting things up. Right now it's setting things up electronically on Zoom, making sure everything's all set that way. But if you're in person, it's what's on the tables. Right now, that's even more important now than it was before, because it's how are we keeping everyone safe? In the past, we'd have fidgets. We might not be able to have fidgets the same way as we used to. It's also thinking through what is the information that's going to be on the table. Remember how I said protective factors were on the table. Saw that beautiful visual for the World Cafés, it'd be on the table. It was nice. I connected with it to a degree because I kept coming back, but I didn't really embed it in me. So thinking through, if you're going to share information, how do you help make that come alive? How do you make families connect with it, understand it? If there's a lot on it, I'll be honest, people are going to skim it, or they're going to say, that's nice, I'll put that to the side and use it when it comes around, and it will get buried under a stack or lost in a file. So how are you going to set things up if you're going to share that information and make it useful? Thinking through forums or other supports that you might need, because as I was getting ready to do the training, one of the pieces of today's is I'm going to have an evaluation just so I can hear what you thought, what you were thinking, but most importantly, to back up, why is this important? Why does this matter? It's not just because of the warm feel good. It's not just because there's cute little babies in mom's arms who are doing this work. No, it's about we're actually finding ways to hear from our communities. We're finding ways to bring people together in a way where it's safe, it's comfortable, our hats are off. It's also thinking through action steps. Again, don't host a cafe just for that warmth and that feel good. Yes, that's important and that's great, but it's got to go somewhere. It's one of the things as we've done cohort trainings here in New York State through NYSPEP. We want action. We don't want to say we've dedicated funding or we gave resources or we've teamed up and it stopped. No, we want to say we did this and this is what we were able to achieve. And in addition to the what you can achieve, what were some of the barriers you hit? Was it funding? Was it COVID? Was it you didn't have the right partners? You didn't have access? What did you do to try to get around those barriers? We need those action steps because, again, the whole idea of this is it may take multiple conversations and hearing that same data again and again and again, but if we can bring data to policymakers, to leaders in different agencies and programs and say, this is what works for families, this is what works for communities, hopefully they can start hearing that and listening to that. With my work with the Alliance, I think too of there's family first legislation running out to communities. And as I think about family first, it truly is a huge opportunity. I encourage you, check out and learn about what that's looking like here in New York State, because again, this is an opportunity for us. How are we really truly going to get these monies that we always hear, like there's this bill or there's this possibility? How do we make sure that funding actually flows out into the community? It hits families, it hits children, it brings that joy, the healthy development, great outcomes for communities. That's the goal of this. And that's what's the difference between the World Cafe and the Community Cafe. It's the protective factors piece. How are we building protective factors in families? How are we helping them see themselves in those lights and with that strength and with those opportunities. It's all about asking the right questions. Again, thinking through. Some questions could be triggering. I think of right now, as the Alliance National Parent Partnership Counselor, AMPPC is developing our infographics on the protective factors. We have one-pagers on them. It has the definition of the protective factor, the everyday actions up top, and then the bottom is how families are building those protective factors. We are currently working on a survey to hear about concrete support in times of need. Kind of ironic, we're working on it right now. But what we have found is the biggest challenge is asking the right questions. Because we don't want to ask and do a survey and get like a bunch of data and be like, okay, this is great, but what direction are we going to go with it? We have to ask questions that will get us data that says, this is what shows up as a concrete support consistently for families. This is how families are dealing with stress. This is how families are feeling when they actually have the support they need. This is the difference it's making in the lives of children. So again, thinking through your questions, you want to be strategic. You don't want it to be what's great in our community and people just go around the table, this, 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 this. Make it a little bit deeper. Think about how do you really open it up and not just a simple, let me give you one word type answer. And I encourage you as you develop questions, again, this is why partners are important. Bounce it off of each other because you want to literally ask each other the question and say, how would you respond? And how would other people respond? Thinking through, because I know too, we talk about those populations that are hard to reach. They're hard to reach because we might not have the relationships. This is a tool in a way that we could go into some of those communities and start building relationships. But if we ask them 500 questions off the bat, they're not going to probably show up again or may not even respond. But if we think through strategically, a couple good questions to start, that gives you your first cafe. And then guess what? You could say, hey, would anybody like to help us with the next one with coming up with some questions? And chances are you may have a couple people who say yes. And remember, start small and work from there. So it's about a mind shift that you're going to have happen. Who are the partners and voices at your table? Really, truly thinking through that. I know tons of agencies have logic models and strategic plans and all this great stuff where we list it, but what does that really mean if they're a partner? How are they showing up? How are they a voice at your table? What are they really doing to advance things for communities? It's also about thinking, what does being a partner in your group mean? What does it take? What does it entail? I think very often there's times where we might say, well, we'd love parents to be at the table. Okay, well, what does that really mean? What's the time commitment? Am I on meetings like every day from morning to night? Am I in a board meeting and you're going to talk about something, I'm going to have no clue what that means? Who prepped me? Who got me ready? And that goes not just for parents, but for professionals. How are we really showing up and being able to be a part of the group? Be a true partner. And with that, I think of even the power piece. Do you really kind of share that? Is there a leader who helps kind of facilitate and not just, boom, this is the only direction we can go, but truly facilitate? Work together in partnership, understanding there might be times where the other's stressed or you're stressed, but it's a give and take. How do we create that mind shift for communities and thinking them through? Who are their partners? What does it mean to be a group? So the cafes are my why. It truly is where I thrive. When I think through the times that I do the trainings, I feel like it's always like at this time where I just need that like boost of that reminder of we can do this. And I really hope that we can help get communities and others to understand that thriving is in conversation. It's not just in let's share concrete information like CDC guidelines, or this is how we reopen, or this is what we can do in our community. No, it's how do we truly thrive, not just survive. We want people to not just feel like, yeah, I went through my day and it was a good day today. No, we want people to be like, oh my gosh, I went through the day, I'm feeling pretty good. I can't wait. I look forward to. How often are we really saying that right now? How do we bring that magic back? Because that magic can come back. Because if there's one thing I know for sure, we will figure it out. It may not have answers right now, but we're going to figure it out and we're going to thrive. And the way we're going to thrive is by having these conversations. It's why my family can stay strong right now. They know that I'm going to host cafes across the state. They know that I'm going to keep them going in my school community. It was so powerful for me to have that cafe. And I'll be honest, I was nervous for that one for the school reopening. I mean, I told the district, I was like, I don't think we should wait till it's already reopened. It should be before that. And then there was all that confusion and stuff that was happening across the state with how the governor was rolling information out and the plans and all that. And I was like, is this going to go well? Like, I hope this doesn't fall like and make a big mess all over my leadership space for the superintendent and the principal. But we talked about that. We were partners. We were able to say, this is what we're going to do if this happens. This is how we're going to operate. And to be honest, I think one of the reasons why it thrived is because it wasn't just the leadership leading. They led with a parent. They led with me. It was not just parents hearing from the leadership, oh, we're going to have this conversation. It was me saying, you know what, this is hard, and I have no clue how we're going to do it. But I know as families, we'll figure it out. And while I know our district is different, it's different for a reason. And that doesn't have to be a bad thing. It could actually end up being a really good thing and could be something that actually is a model for other districts. So helping families keep that hope alive and being able to thrive. Now I'm going to kind of shift and have you start thinking about families. And a lot of these slides are going to say parents. And so I want you to really think of the idea of parents being any caregiver who's helping to raise children right now. Because I know some families, that's grandparents coming in. My mom did that this week for me. There was a day I was crazy busy, and grandma came in, and she was the one helping with Google Classrooms and doing fun science activities or things with my kids so that they could thrive. So thinking through these slides, remember parents are caregivers, anyone who's working in the lives of children. Why is it important to even build partnerships with them? It's because the family is really truly the center of a child's life. Remember the protective factors. Parents are number one. Parents need to hear that. It's also important that parents can give that view of that whole child and really be able to celebrate that. I think right now, thinking through as we're going through classrooms and things like that virtually, it's sharing it with a teacher. You know what? My kid is really nervous about being on Zoom today and having to share. Any tips or ideas? And the teacher being like, well, many people are going to feel that way. Don't worry, we've got it. But it's communicating back and forth, not just the education, the social emotional piece too. What's very interesting is research says that highly involved families almost double the positive odds for children in education, health, promotion, and social emotional development. It's funny with this because it makes me think of something one of my school leadership has said to me, and they're like, Kara, not all parents are like you. I'm like, yeah, no, not all parents are like me, because I like asking the hard questions. I like knowing as much as I can. But guess what? Parents do want to know information. Parents do want access. Some of us are crazy busy with work, but when it comes to our kids, we'll do anything. So I want you to think of, how do we help families be involved right now? How do we help families understand how to use the digital platforms that we're using, to know how to turn their child's camera picture in the little square off so they don't have to look at themselves, but they're still on camera for their teacher? How do we help them with Google Classrooms? Right now, there's a bazillion of them for one of my children. How do you help families understand how to navigate that? They can't be highly involved if they don't know. And part of that is information sharing in tangible, approachable ways. And guess what? One of the ways to do that is community cafes, talking about how are you working with Google Classroom with your family, and letting people share and say, why does it work for you? Some parents are going to tell you about the app on their phone. Other parents are going to say, I have their Google Classroom up and I check it every day. But letting the parents share that information and not just be a school person saying, this is the way that you can do it. it's not putting that down. It's just saying, let's enrich that. Let's build on that. Remember, it's about strengths. It's not about weaknesses. It's, we're doing this, but let's take it to the next level. And let's also involve families, and let's find ways for the family's voice to be a part of it, because we want children to be well. Parents will get involved if they believe the issue is important to them and their family. Trust me, you can pretty well tell if somebody were to track me what's important to me, and it's my family's strong and my family's doing good. It's also for me about my community being good and my community being well. And you'll get to understand that a little bit more when I close today with the closing that I have. Also, they believe they have something to contribute. It's an opportunity for them to shine. It's an opportunity for them to engage. It's also important that they'll be listened to and their contributions respected. I think of this week, I was in a meeting and I was the parent voice sitting at the table. I loved it because whenever I can truly wear my parent hat, it like warms me up and it gets me all revved up and excited. And we were talking about language, and it was interesting because I was listening to people share, and then I was able to give my input, and then we were able to hear a different perspective. And what I appreciated about that moment, my contribution was being respected. My contribution was being listened to, and we were able to have a really good exchange talking about the importance of language. And there wasn't necessarily a you're right, you're wrong. It was truly a very warm, safe space where both ideas were able to be acknowledged so that a greater good could be found at the end. It was also believing that parent participation will make a difference. I would not be doing this with you today if I didn't believe it truly makes a difference. Cafes truly provide an opportunity for families. It provides an opportunity for communities. It truly is something that I think can change the way things happen across the state. It can change how we do services. I think back to my early days in early intervention, and what's funny is my provider would always try to create these like spaces for us as parents to kind of get to know each other and build relationships. And that's the whole reason I'm involved with this. But I didn't make that connection right away when this first came into my life. Looking back, I can tell you that now. And I can say, I wish I knew then what I know now, because it was back then that he really was trying to have a difference happen for both of our families and all the other families that were involved in that project. And I was like, wow. So I encourage you again, right now we're fast paced. There's a lot. It's almost like we're always in a reactive mode. How do we slow down a little bit? How do we appreciate some of the things that are right in front of us? How do we appreciate the opportunities that we have to really communicate? Most importantly, how do we find the opportunities to really get people involved that maybe we couldn't before? Because again, think through, we can bring people to Zoom very easily. There's no cost with travel or things like that. And as long as you set up the space to say, like, it's okay if your child comes in and needs a hug, or it's okay if you have to turn off your camera to go get your child a snack. You can have parents show up because there'll be less stress of judgment or fear that that could be a problem. How do parents stay involved? One, we need lots of different opportunities. And yes, I know that sounds like Carrie, you're asking a lot. No, you need multiple opportunities where sometimes they say no and sometimes they say yes. And why I say that is because very often initially, they might tell you no. And they're going to be worried you're never going to come back and ask them again. You need to find and make an effort to A, build the relationship in the meantime, and then most importantly, ask again. And it can be anything from a small contribution of their time to bigger uses of their time and effort. If you ask again, those that know me, they're going to say Kara's like in 20 different directions and in multiple places. And it is hard, especially right now, that sometimes I do say no. And sometimes I'm like, nope, I can't do that. Or instead of being able to respond to emails, Melody is fabulous because she knows that the best way to communicate with me is text message. And so she'll text me. So thinking through that, how do parents stay involved? It's you really truly get creative in how much time you're asking of them. And also you find different opportunities for them. We also need sufficient advance notice. Like I said, I had to have a plan for my kids so you would hopefully hear minimal sounds and minimal chaos in the background. it was figuring out, how do I have everything that I need so that I can participate? Meaning, was I ready with my technology? Do I know what's going to happen? Also, if we are doing things in person, we do need help with childcare or transportation, meaning our mileage, meals, if it's a long thing, or some form of compensation. And to be honest, sometimes my participation actually is facilitated by me being able to be a part of conferences. And not only am I sitting on a panel, but then I have other pieces that I'm able to engage with where I'm learning more things to bring back to my community and most importantly to my family. And why I say that is because sometimes as parents and as we're being engaged in this way, if we're passionate about it, remember how it said that was important, we're going to find a way to do it and make it happen. And initially, some parents may use their own personal family funds to be able to show up, to be able to do things. And I know funding's hard, but if you can find a way to even help with one piece of that, and then progressively maybe more, it can really make a difference. Because think of families have budgets too. How do we help them to be able to budget not only their time and responsibilities, but also the financial aspect? It's a tough, tricky one, but I encourage you to kind of think about it. And how they also stay involved is their stories are listened to. We need our ideas supported and respected. And if there's conflict, we need to be able to have a safe space to address it. Or maybe there's a difference of opinion. How do we really kind of tease that out? We also need to not experience retribution as a result of participating in the activity. And we need to know it has an impact. We need to know we didn't just show up and put a check in the checkbox. Yep, there was a parent here today. And I'll be honest, I know grants and other things are pushing for that more and more, that there's parents at the table, there's parents engaged, and there's checkboxes literally for that. But please do not treat families or parents as checkbox items. I so strongly encourage you for that. Because I'll be honest, sometimes I see that when I'm asked things, and I will not show up to something to be a checkbox parent. I'll show up if you really want to hear what I have to say or if I feel it's going to make an impact. So I really, truly want you to think about that, because there is a difference, and parents might not notice it right away, but they will notice it when they start having more experiences and get the ones that you're not just a checkbox. You're there to be a part of the team. It's also their participation is consciously and visibly appreciated. They're encouraged. They're given ideas of how they can improve, not because you're trying to say you did something wrong, but simply to help polish, help get you even more advanced in your skills. You need to know that you're appreciated and you're cared about. That's just normal for anyone. But let's make sure if families are showing up, we're acknowledging that. We're right now saying, we know your life has got to be chaotic because there's so much going on, especially if they have more than one child. We really would greatly appreciate it if you could be a part of this. This is how much time it would take. And most importantly, hopefully you did some prep work with them so that way they know what is going to be looked at or talked about in the meeting, so they're ready to contribute. They're ready to make that impact. So how could you get started if you haven't already? You could ask them what they want and need from your program, meaning you could just pull some parents together and start that conversation. Most importantly, you could frame it in terms of protective factors. Asking them, what's hard about parenting? Imagine some of those answers right now. It could be anything from the challenges they're experiencing of children missing friends to children, if they have multiples, being like, I'm tired of being with my sibling all the time, to it could just be, I don't have the skills for this right now. Like, there is no parenting handbook for COVID. I'd love it if somebody wants to write it. I will totally buy the first copy of it, but that doesn't exist right now. But we could ask the question and we could start talking about it. Then we could say, how could we be a more welcoming place for parents where families feel comfortable asking for help or advice? Asking for help is hard. For me, I like to be independent and strong. Anyone who knows me will tell you, like, Kara's just the person who will get it done. She will figure it out. She'll find a way. It wasn't until, again, going through the training and hearing them frame asking for help in a different way, which in that training they said, if you're going to ask for help and you're struggling with it, think of what you're taking away from those who could offer the help. Asking for help should be a sign of a strength, not a weakness. So I encourage us, how do we make that a part of our community? How do we make asking for help easier where there's not guilt or shame or uncomfortableness, but it's almost just natural? You just say, hey, could you help me? Almost like we should be able to do with neighbors, but how do we spread that beyond and out into the whole community? How do we spread, I have no clue what I'm doing in this class virtually, I need help, where there's not comments or judgment or slams against schools right now. Instead it's, well, have you tried this or have you tried that? Next one, big one. How can we reach out to and support families when they're overwhelmed, stressed, or isolated? Like I said, we're in a reactive place right now as communities. So how do we reach out? How do we help families understand they're not alone? How do we help them feel that there's a team behind them? There's people who can support them and encourage them. How do we help kind of lessen the stress? Right now with the Alliance, we are doing an awesome project that I absolutely love being a part of. It's called the Alliance Resiliency Project. And it is for the entire parent network that we support across the country. And what we've decided is, initially when COVID hit, I was like, okay, like Alliance, we talk about relationships all the time. We need to check in on our network. We hosted a webinar, brought parents together, heard from them a little bit, asked them a survey. So be careful of survey questions because this is what happens. And said, how often would you like to stay connected? Would you like to stay connected? It was an overwhelming response of yes. And they decided that they wanted to meet weekly. So we are hosting weekly caring conversations for the parents. It's amazing. It's huge. But again, it's grounded in protective factors. It has a cafe flair to it with how we do it. But we're letting parents talk and connect and try to feel less stressed. Next and last one, how do we make it easier for parents to connect with each other? We have to socially distance. How do I reach out and talk to my parent friends who can sympathize or empathize with where I'm at? How do I keep connected to those parents for support? Community cafes is a way to do that. It's also a way where I'm encouraging the schools to think through strategically grade level wise. Could we host, instead of district-wide cafes, kindergarten cafes for kindergarten families to come together, sixth grade cafes, high school cafes? I think of the seniors. Like so often we think little kids. I'm thinking of kids who are seniors this year who again are entering a year of the unknown. But after this year of the unknown, they're going out into the real world. How are we talking about that with those parents, helping their parents prepare them for whatever's to come after school? How are we preparing the kids? How are we giving them space to talk about their dreams for the future when right now the future has so many question marks in it? Again, cafes are a space where we can do that. Cafes is an approach that we can use. And so what do parents think about their role and voice? When I was first in the position where I could be kind of the lead trainer for cafes, I was like, well, I want to hear from parents. Like, they always hear from me, but that's not the same. Some other things that parents have said about their role and their voice is it gives children the keys to their chosen futures. Endless limits. It's an opportunity to model commitment to your children, your family, your community, and yourself. It can provide every child a foundation of love and support for a future they deserve. Each child the confidence to believe they can conquer the world. Strength to families and communities. As you heard though, it's like just me, like it's been a while since I've been with this, but like gives me goosebumps thinking this is what parents think about them being able to have a voice and a role in their community. Think about the idea of that commitment. Our kids need to know, what does that look like in this unknown world? They're watching us, they're learning from us. I think so often of even my own two kids, very often they'll like say things or they'll do things and they're like, well, that's like you, Mom. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like you are picking up and seeing what I'm doing. My children know what I'm doing with all of you today, and they know how important cafes are to me, to our family, to our community. because they've been a part of it since they were super young. They've seen the commitment that has been made. But most importantly, I think they've seen the why. They've seen people in cafes come to the cafe, be a part of the conversation, and afterwards, because of the relationship, be able to come over to one of the leaders in tears saying, I have no idea how I'm paying rent, putting food on the table for my kids. I lost my voice and my ability to do anything to help them. They've seen the difference of being able to give that parent back their voice and say, it's okay. Just because you don't have the resources does not mean that you can't do this. We will help you find the resources. We will help figure out what this is and where those people are in the community for you. And we help them to get to the other side of this challenge. And so I encourage you to think through that piece too. So as you're having these conversations virtually, and this is bringing it back to the COVID piece, if you have those conversations, and there should be facilitators in those breakout rooms, you want to be able to meet back together and kind of debrief afterwards. Was there anybody who was overly quiet or who looked troubled or upset? Was there anyone who maybe said a direct need that they have? You want to make sure that you do the follow-up. Don't just, again, have that opportunity where they're together and leave them hanging. Again, this is about relationship building. It's about sensing and doing what is needed for your community. So it's really thinking through that piece. But now, let's talk about what can you do. What are some ways that you can engage parents in your community? I want you thinking about these and starting to put them in the chat. What are ways you can engage parents in your community right now? Remember that parent word I want you to use loosely. I want you to think about grandparents, foster parents, kinship providers, anyone who is a caregiver to children. How can you engage with them? What are some of the barriers you need to cross? We all know COVID's a given, but what are those other barriers we have to figure out? And how will the idea of engaging and involving parents change your community? So I want you thinking about those for a few minutes, and I want you to go ahead and type into the chat some of your thoughts about ways that you can engage, some of those barriers. How will the idea of engaging and involving parents change your community? Let's take a few minutes, let you type those thoughts in. Remember, we start small. It doesn't have to be super huge. I think of right now how for the Alliance, we're getting ready to do that survey with some families. We don't like surveying them to death, but we decided with COVID we wanted to go back and do some surveys, get some data. Is that where you're going to start? Ask parents what their interests are. That's great. Some of the barriers are technology, absolutely. Overcoming the anxiety parents may have. Maybe they never had an opportunity to participate in a meaningful way before. Absolutely, Leah. I think technology can be a super big challenge, figuring it out even. So I encourage you to think through that piece. Are there any tools or resources for us when we're doing those caring conversations? We have a Zoom tool sheet and we go over the Zoom controls, even if people have been on it before. So they know how to mute, unmute. They know how to use the chat. I think through too, there is a lot of kind of nervousness of what does it mean to be involved with this? And again, when parents feel their voice is heard and respected, they're going to share that out. They're going to ask other people to be a part of the work. Any other thoughts that you have? And hopefully there'll be increased participation in the community. Absolutely, Leah. I think when we find ways to engage with families, our communities can get strong. I love it. Lori, you've been engaging parents in discussions all summer about how to reopen the schools. And one barrier was the people who don't share airtime. Absolutely. One thing that I would encourage you, so I'm going to start giving you a sneak peek into some of the cafe training that I do, is we do talk about that, the people who don't share the airtime well. As a facilitator, if you're doing it in person, just kind of using your presence to kind of listen in and then find an opportunity where you can break in and say, wow, that's great, and then turn the conversation as a facilitator to someone else. If it's happening on Zoom, what I'd encourage you to do is use that listen technique that I mentioned at the beginning. So if you have that person who's not sharing their airtime, say, I want everybody to think about this question. So kind of like the 3 questions I gave you. And say, you know what, I want everyone to just think about this question for a minute. No one say anything. And literally create that pause for everyone. And say, I want you to think of what is the one thing that if you had your wish, you would have someone walk away with today. And then let everybody share, and hopefully that will help cut down on that overusing of their airtime. Also encouraging people to use the chat. I will tell you a little secret. If you're using Zoom, the 3 little dots is an opportunity where you can see where you can save the chat. That was something that was learned this week in one of the meetings, because I was being a major hogger of airtime in the chat box, and I was typing profusely in it. You can encourage people to do that because some people will respond there and verbally. So that's an additional opportunity for you to figure out, like, how do you kind of manage that? And I love it, Rosanna, having parents at the decision-making tables, absolutely. And when you do that, I want you to think through, has the decision already been made and you're just trying to kind of get a stamp of approval? Or are they truly being able to help with some of that decision making? Because when you're having those cafe conversations, the parents can truly be a part of helping to make those decisions. In my other work that I do in terms of helping to support parents as partners, one of the things we tell the parents is when you're invited to one of those tables, you don't get to dictate and tell them how to do their job if you're working with a group. Rather, you can offer suggestions and insights and share ideas, but you also have to, as a parent partner, learn how the structure operates, learn who the people are that you might interact with, learn how their methods are. For some, I think of how I shared with you, how Melody texts me. For some groups, texting isn't allowed. Like, it's just a no-go because of data. They have to make sure it's all like by email or other formal ways of communicating. So I encourage you, help explore that and explore that with the parent partners so that way they understand and can be a part of the work that you're going to do as you move forward. And then I want you to think through, what are some topics you could raise at your cafes? I know in the conversation we talked about school reopening. We could even talk about what to do if our school has to shut back down, if your schools have in-person classes. You could talk too about school of just how do we help support virtual school. Thinking through too, how do we promote safety in our community? How do we talk about, again, the idea of race and culture, some of those tougher topics where there could be different opinions. How do we help manage that and create safe space where everyone feels they can share? And again, if you want to get started, I really encourage you to think through a few questions that you could begin with for conversation. Think through, what would your cafe include? Would you want to share resources? And again, remembering sharing resources, how I've kind of like sprinkled them out throughout the presentation, you want to give a little background on them. You want to let parents know where to find them. Especially if it's like a hard copy thing, if they need more of them, you want to be able to let parents know, how do they get them? I think of my work across the state very often. I like some of the tools and resources from the Office of Mental Health. And so I have reached out to my contact, and I have a method now of, if I need a resource, how do I get more for others in my community? And I tend to be the one, back when we didn't have COVID, that I would gather up all the leftover resources at the end to bring them back to my community. And if people know what those resources are, they'll do that. Thinking through, who could help you in this work? It's a lot to be on like this and be talking and facilitating conversation navigating bumps or things like that. Who's going to help you with the technology if you're doing it virtually? Who's your backup if you don't feel well or an emergency comes up? Who are those partners? Where are you going to hold it? And again, thinking through technology can be a barrier. It can be hard to figure out how to get on Zoom, how to be able to use your audio. I think of a lot of professionals right now, especially in the health field, they're doing like web meetings. Sometimes the audio is really hard to hear. How do you help support them to know how to navigate that? And sometimes what we do is we'll do kind of like a pre-session where it's just like a fake mock meeting where we make sure everybody knows how to sign in and where things are and how to move things around. Especially with Zoom, I think of how there's the opportunity where we could do a whiteboard and you could be drawing on it, but there needs to be guidance on how to do that. What are the tools? Then think of too, what work can you build on? Yeah, life stopped back in March, but work's still happening and good work. There's a lot going on in our communities. How do we build on that? How do we even let parents know what's still happening? What's still options? For me, being a part of the work that I do across the state, it gives me hope because I know that even right now, there's a lot of good things happening. There's a lot of people trying to share good resources, trying to show up and be there for families, even when it's hard, and even when sometimes the answer is, I don't know, but I'll get back to you. What possibilities truly exist? Can you be a big dreamer? What are your opportunities to kind of really think through what could be? Try to fast forward time. Think of what would you love to have happen if COVID was done and over? What would you like your community to look about? And as I think about cafes, I think not only of, I want it in my work environment, I want it in my community. It's why I brought it to my children's school. And what I love about the question of what possibilities exist is New York State has done several reports about the work of community cafes, and you can find that on NYSPEP's website. And when one of those reports were being written, we were doing a report, one of the principals and I, when we had started cafes in the schools, and the question is, what's next? And like, we were proud that we just had brought cafes to the school, period. And we literally were trying to come up with what it could be, and we were kind of stuck because we didn't know. Like, we started thinking of barriers and things. And one day I had an aha moment, and I was like, what if we use the intercom system in the school to talk through the cafe questions into all the classrooms, and the children are in small groups and get to have those conversations, and then for reporting back, teachers can text us back through the Remind app we were using. They can email, or they can call the office secretary and share in, and then we can report that out in between questions. And so we shared that in the report, and I was like, yeah, like, I don't know how that's ever going to happen, because that's a lot of moving players. In our building, we have a bazillion people. It's pre-K to grade 6, at least 4 grades, like 4 classes for each grade level. And mixed in with all of that, we also have the staff that we have to take into account, and the fact that they're supposed to be learning, right? And so our first step was we had to teach the teachers that this is just like when you do cooperative learning in your class, and give them a tool guide. Then we had to think through logistically how that whole communicating would go back and forth. And we did the first one, and I have to tell you, it was super cool because I didn't facilitate it. I got to run around the school and like peek in the classrooms at what people were doing. It was amazing, one, hearing some of the ideas that the kids had for the questions we asked. But I think my favorite was when I walked down and I was past this teacher's room, I thought that that teacher wasn't going to buy into this idea. But I heard the teacher literally saying, oh my gosh, guys, that's a great idea. Give us another one. Come on, you guys got this. You can give us more. It was youth engaged. It was teachers engaged. It was so powerful. The staff asked how often we could do it. And to be honest, it took about 30 minutes max. And we were able to ask 3 different questions and gather so much awesome information about ideas for our school. our first questions actually weren't even ones that were light. Our first questions were, how do we make asking for help easier in our school? How do we show up and be there for our friends? The kids got to talk about that and then hear their ideas. When our district started talking about strategic planning, the kids got to say, what were they looking forward to having in their school? And of course, you're going to have those kids that say they'd love to have like a water park and a super slide. But they also had kids that were like, you know what? I would love it if there was a friendship bench out at our playground. So if I didn't have a friend to play with, I'd have some way that I could get a friend. That came from a kid. Think of the power of our district now working to actually make that happen. And that child, when they go out to the playground, seeing that, even right now during COVID, think about that possibility. And so, like I said, we didn't know if that idea would ever happen. We knew it was going to take a lot logistically. It did happen. And now our school uses it with their positive behavior intervention system and uses it. So when they're struggling with challenging behaviors or things, having the kids talk about the solutions. So I really encourage you, think big, think bold. And the reason I say topics and questions and all of that, if you start framing some of that out, it gives you something to work from. And again, think of that polishing and that refining. That happens when you take that time to start dreaming about it. And most importantly, think through your partners. You don't want to be alone in this work. You want to have a buddy. I was very fortunate when this work first started and for the state, they decided they really wanted it parent-led, and they kind of passed it over to myself and another one of my dear friends, Katie McIntyre. And we were kind of like the lead trainers who went out and were training and doing all of this work together. I miss Katie immensely. She was an awesome partner to have. We just bounced off of each other well. There were times that she added things that I forgot or vice versa. It was also important because she could bring other partners to the table. So I really encourage you, think through who your partners could be. And I really want to close with this and hear from you in the chat about your vision. What's your hope or dream for the community you thought about today? And the reason I say for the community you thought about is because initially when I got involved with this work, community was my whole city of Auburn. Community has since then become one of our community centers, one of our schools, one of our smaller groups that help support early intervention. I want you to think through, what is the community that you really want to make a difference in? What's your hope or dream for it? And I'd love for you to share that in the chat today. And as you're getting ready to do that, I'm going to share with you that thing that I told you is the powerful piece. And that is this beautiful ending, because with every cafe, we kind of have something powerful that we kind of leave people with. And this is what was always shared at the cafes that we did for our city of Auburn. And it just has stuck with me enormously, especially now thinking of the times we're in. And it's taken from the presentation at the 2011 World Forum on Early Care and Education. And Lillian Katz shared a concern from her book, Intellectual Emergencies, Some Reflections on Mothering and Teaching. And in it, this is what she said. I believe that each of us must come to care about everyone else's children. We must come to see that the well-being of our own individual children is intimately linked to the well-being of all other people's children. After all, when one of our children needs life-saving surgery, someone else's child will perform it. When one of our children is threatened or harmed by violence in the streets, someone else's child will inflict it. The good life for our own children can only be secured if it is also secured for all other people's children. But to worry about all other people's children is not just a practical or strategic matter. It is a moral and ethical one. To strive for the well-being of all other people's children is also right. So it's a powerful thing to think about when you think about being a parent, having your own kids. When you take a quote like this and you actually think of and plug your own kids in there, not only for the positive, but for the bad that can and does happen at times. It really teaches you why it's so critically important that we care about our communities, that we care about one another. And as we close, again, I hope you share in what some of your hopes or dreams are. And I also want to share with you that we do have an evaluation for today's presentation that I would so greatly appreciate you filling out. It's a Google form, very short, and I would love any feedback, thoughts you have, information that you want to share. That would be so greatly appreciated and valued. And Melody will put that link in the chat for you, so that way you have that. And then I'm just going to open it up for any questions that you all may have, and feel free to type them in.
Kara, we do have a question in the chat box, and it comes from Yvette. She asks, how are cafes providing accessibilities to parents with disabilities?
So one of the things that you would want to know is, does a parent need an interpreter? Does a parent need any help in terms of being able to participate in a cafe? So if it is an in-person cafe, it's the accessibility of the building. It's also making sure that if they have any special medical health needs, that you're ready to kind of meet those or address those. If you have a parent who might be deaf or hard of hearing, again, you might need someone who can sign for them or be a part of that. And so it's one of those things of, you just need to know your population and then look for the needed resources so that they can participate just as equally as everyone else. Great question, Yvette. Any other questions, Melody? And I'm going to put up the last slide if you want to learn more, have additional questions beyond today. That is my personal cell. Feel free to call. As you heard me say, texting is like super good for me. I tend to be pretty prompt that way, or feel free to send me an email. Melody, do we have any other questions that we could answer?
Not at this time. Yes, there will be a recording of this training available.
And then you should also, Melody, were you able to put in the file of the PowerPoint as well, if anybody needed that?
The PowerPoint will be sent out via email coming from me. It's set out to send at 4:30 when the training is over. So you all should be expecting that in your inboxes if you have registered through our Zoom link.
Wonderful. Thanks, Melody. And so I just would encourage you in our final moments, feel free to ask questions, share comments. But most importantly, if you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes to do that evaluation, it would be greatly appreciated. While you're filling out the evaluation, I just want to thank all of you for taking time to be with us today and to hear about the cafes. And I hope it gave you some inspiration for your communities, gave you some ideas of what you could do. And again, I encourage you to not only look at the PowerPoint that Melody will be sending, but check out NYSPEP's website to learn more of some of what the work has been happening across the state for some time now. There's, as I shared the reports you can see, there's things about the community cohorts that NYSPEP sponsors. It's a great opportunity to learn more. And also feel free to check out those resources that I mentioned from the Alliance. There's additional information about protective factors, community cafes, partnering with parents that you can access. And I will be putting the Alliance's website in the chat for all of you right now in case you would like to check that out any further. And again, if there's something specific you're looking for, let me know and I will be happy to help find it. This work is near and dear to my heart. And Lori, you're most welcome. I'm glad you'll be able to use the tools. Please let us know if there's anything we can do to help support you as you use them. And I'll just say, if you don't have any questions and you have completed the evaluation, I hope that you enjoy the gift of the few minutes extra that we got out a little bit early, so that way you can enjoy the rest of your day or wrap up anything you need to before you call it a night for tonight. But again, I hope you check out the tools, the resources, and most importantly, let us know if there's anything more we can do to help support your understanding of the cafes or give you more information of how you could get them going in your community. Thea, thank you. That means a lot. Judy, thank you very much. It's good to have you here. You are part of my beginning with all this great work. All right, everyone, be well, take care, and please let us know if there's anything more we can do. Again, check out the NYSPEP website, the Alliance's website, and let us know if there's anything we can do to keep this work growing across the state, and most importantly, building connections and relationships and keeping communities strong. Thank you so much.